The Timbuktu Chronicle, also known as the Tarikh al-Fatash, or Chronicle of the Seeker, is an extraordinary work of literature that beautifully weaves together two great traditions of the Songhai Empire. It is a seamless blend of the scholarly Islamic traditions that flourished in Timbuktu and the ancient oral histories of the griots and sorcerers of West Africa. The result is not just a history book, but a mesmerizing epic filled with poetic depth. This is the story of an epic battle that changed the course of African history forever, a battle that toppled one of the greatest empires the continent had ever known. In the quiet dawn of October 16, 1590, Marrakesh stirred with anticipation as Mulai Ahmad al-Mansur, the ambitious ruler of Morocco, gave the command to launch a military campaign into the fabled city of gold, just south of the Sahara. His goal was to secure the source of wealth that had long eluded empires, the gold of the Sudan, hidden within the sprawling Songhai Empire. However, al-Mansur's ambitions were not simply about gold. They were fueled by a desire for power. In a world where Islam's caliphates vied for supremacy, al-Mansur sought to establish himself as the caliph of the Sudan, not just a king, but a divine ruler, ordained by God to control the rich lands to the south. But how did Morocco get to the point of wanting to invade the mighty Songhai Empire to the south? To answer this question, we need to go back a decade earlier. The year was 1578, and the sun burned mercilessly over the battlefield near Al-Qasr Quibir, a small town in Morocco where two powerful armies clashed in a desperate struggle. On one side stood the ambitious young King Sebastian I of Portugal, eager to reclaim Christian dominion over North Africa and curb the expanding influence of the Ottoman Empire. On the other side, Sultan Abd al-Malik of Morocco, leading his seasoned troops, fought to maintain his nation's independence. The stakes were high, and the battle would reshape the course of history for both nations. As the armies collided, the Moroccan forces, skilled and hardened, overwhelmed the Portuguese. Amidst the chaos, King Sebastian fell, and with his death, Portugal's fate crumbled. It wasn't just the loss of a king, it was the loss of a nation's stability. Portugal, now leaderless, plunged into a succession crisis that ultimately led to its subjugation by Spain under the Iberian Union for the next 60 years. The once mighty kingdom found itself shackled under foreign rule. Morocco, on the other hand, emerged victorious, but at a tremendous cost. Sultan Abd al-Malik had died shortly after the battle, leaving the kingdom under the rule of his brother, Ahmad al-Mansur. Al-Mansur, the victor of Al-Qasr Quibir, was hailed as a hero, but he now faced the daunting task of stabilizing a war-weary Morocco. The kingdom's coffers were nearly empty from the prolonged conflict, and Al-Mansur needed a new source of wealth to maintain Morocco's independence and power. His eyes turned southward to the rich and prosperous lands of the Songhai Empire. Our story about the conquest of Songhai continues. The path to Songhai was perilous, a deadly journey across the unrelenting Sahara, where blistering winds and endless sand dunes swallowed men whole. It was not the first time al-Mansur had attempted such a feat. Whispers of a failed expedition lingered in the streets of Marrakesh, with only one survivor returning, half-mad from thirst and sunstroke, his tales dismissed as hallucinations. Yet al-Mansur was undeterred. He assembled an army unlike any before it, diverse in its composition, reliant not on native Moroccans, but on Andalusians, Spanish Moors, and mercenaries from across the Mediterranean world. The language of this army was not Arabic, but Spanish, a testament to how deeply the influence of European powers had permeated Moroccan society by this time. At the head of this army stood Pasha Judar, a man chosen not for his martial prowess, but for his loyalty and organizational brilliance. Once a captive from Granada, Judar had been raised in al-Mansur's court, shaped into the perfect instrument of his ruler's will. His officers were a strange mix: eunuchs, renegades, and Christian bodyguards, all bound by their loyalty to a ruler who had fashioned his army from a mosaic of foreign influences. Their ranks included men armed with the deadly arquebus, a primitive firearm, lethal but unreliable. Yet they also possessed something far more devastating: cannons obtained through Morocco's trade ties with England, powerful enough to shatter the ranks of even the most formidable army. With this force, Judah led his men across the Sahara, marching under the scorching sun, over dunes where the sand stung like needles. It was a march into the unknown, a brutal 135-day journey that decimated their ranks. By the time they reached the outskirts of Songhai, half the army had perished, either claimed by the desert or from sheer exhaustion. But still, they pressed on, guided by tales of gold and the promise of glory. The empire they sought to conquer was a shadow of its former self. Songhai, once the jewel of West Africa, had grown complacent. Its rulers, descendants of the mighty Askias, were unprepared for the invasion that came not from a neighboring enemy, but from across the vast expanse of the Sahara, a direction no one believed an army could march from. The air was thick with dust as the Moroccan army, battered by the desert, finally reached the banks of the Niger River. They had marched for months, the once proud force now reduced to a weary band of soldiers. Their numbers, once large enough to fill a grand theater, were now thin and haggard, their uniforms caked in layers of dust. Malaria had claimed many, and the dreaded sleeping sickness had made others weak. But at last, the goal of their brutal journey lay before them: the city of Gao, capital of the Songhai Empire, looming on the horizon. The land before the city was treacherous, the floodplain of the Niger still swampy from the seasonal rains. Mosquitoes swarmed in the thick air, and every step was an ordeal. But in the distance, across the vast plain, rose the walls of Gao, a city that had once commanded respect and fear across West Africa. Now, though diminished, it was still the heart of the empire. And not far from its walls, at a place called Tondibi, the soldiers saw the sight that would soon haunt them: the full might of the Songhai army marching to meet them. The Songhai king, Askia Ishak II, had assembled his forces for this momentous battle. Some estimated that the army numbered 40,000, others claimed it was as many as 80,000. The Songhai marched with the confidence of an empire that had dominated the region for centuries, their numbers alone enough to inspire terror. As the armies squared off, the Songhai forces, unfamiliar with the destructive power of Moroccan gunpowder, had devised a bold plan. They would send a stampede of 1,000 cattle toward the enemy lines, hoping that the onslaught would absorb the musket fire and throw the Moroccan soldiers into confusion. Once the Moroccan lines were broken, the heavy cavalry of the Songhai could charge in and cut them down. The plan, however, quickly fell apart. As the stampeding cattle thundered toward the Moroccan army, the first volley of cannon fire erupted across the battlefield. The sound was deafening, a thunderclap that echoed off the distant dunes. The cattle, terrified by the noise, panicked and turned back, crashing into the ranks of the Songhai soldiers. Chaos ensued, with the mighty beasts trampling men underfoot as they fled. The Songhai infantry, despite the catastrophe, pressed forward, determined to overwhelm the smaller Moroccan force. But their bravery was no match for the deadly efficiency of the Moroccan muskets. From the high ground, the Moroccans fired volley after volley, the lead balls cutting through the air with terrifying speed. Long before the sound of the musket shots reached the Songhai ranks, the bullets had already found their mark, piercing through armor and flesh, leaving hundreds of men dead with each crack of gunfire. The dust from the battle swirled in the air, choking the soldiers and obscuring the field in a haze. But as the Songhai warriors fell, fear spread through their ranks. As the chronicler Tariq al-Fatash later recorded, the dust, smoke, and fear sowed dread into the hearts of the Songhai. King Askia Ishak, watching from a distance, began to panic. His army, the mightiest in West Africa, was being decimated by a small foreign force. Desperate, he ordered his cavalry to charge, hoping to at least reach the Moroccan lines. But the result was another disaster. The Songhai cavalry, though heavily armored, were no match for the musket balls. Their horses, unaccustomed to the thunderous noise of cannons and gunfire, bolted in terror, throwing their riders into disarray. The Moroccan bullets tore through the cavalry ranks, sending men and horses crashing to the ground. One by one, the Songhai units broke. The archers, unable to get within range, were cut down before they could loose a single arrow. Soon, all that remained of the once glorious army was the king's personal guard, the elite warriors sworn to protect Askia Ishak to the last breath. They were surrounded, and knowing their fate was sealed, they fought with a ferocity that earned the respect of their enemies. According to one Spanish account, the royal bodyguards even tied their legs together with belts, kneeling on the ground to hold their spear line in place as their strength failed. But their courage could not save them. The battle was over. The Songhai army was shattered, and Askia Ishak fled the battlefield, his dreams of victory turned to dust. Pasha Judah, the leader of the Moroccan forces, ordered his men to advance. The Moroccans, sensing the battle was won, finally drew their swords and polearms, engaging the Songhai survivors in brutal hand-to-hand combat. It was a slaughter. The city of Gao, defenseless and reeling from the defeat at Tondibi, fell soon after. The Moroccans descended upon the city like a swarm, looting its treasures and setting its buildings ablaze. The chronicle Tariq al-Fatash recorded the devastation with sorrow. It is beyond our power to describe all the misery and losses suffered. The Moroccans tore the doors from houses and cut down the trees of the city. But Gao was only the beginning. Judah's victory, though swift, was hollow. Gao, the heart of Songhai, did not yield the rivers of gold they had been promised. The source of Songhai's wealth, the famed gold mines, remained elusive, hidden, protected by the secretive silent trade conducted by tribes along the Niger River. The men who guarded these secrets were nowhere to be found. Despite this, Judah did not turn back. His orders were clear: secure Timbuktu. The ancient city was a center of learning and trade, but it too offered little in the way of riches. Libraries were destroyed, the learned scholars of Timbuktu taken in chains back to Marrakesh. The Moroccans pressed on to the great trading city of Djenné, where they repeated the same horrors. The occupying Moroccan forces faced a harsh reality. Disease, heat, and malnutrition plagued them. Their numbers dwindled further, and yet Al-Mansur, back in Marrakesh, proclaimed their success to the world. He paraded a skull through the streets, claiming it to be that of the defeated Askia Ishak, though the Songhai ruler had escaped into the forests of Dendi, continuing to resist. As reinforcements arrived from Morocco, led by Mohammed, a eunuch general, the situation in Songhai grew more desperate. Mohammed, more cunning and ruthless than Judah, constructed boats from the scarce wood of Timbuktu's doors and marched his forces into the forests of the south, determined to capture the fleeing Songhai resistance. His victory came at Gurma, where Askia Ishak was finally cornered and killed by Tuareg tribesmen. Yet, even with Songhai's leaders dead, the war dragged on. Guerrilla warfare, revolts in Timbuktu, and the sheer vastness of the land made it impossible for the Moroccans to establish true control. The once mighty Songhai Empire had fallen, but in its place was not a Moroccan kingdom, but chaos. The gold, the true prize, remained out of reach to the invading army. In the end, Al-Mansur's dream of becoming Caliph of the Sudan dissolved into the desert sands. The Moroccan invasion, though a military success, was a strategic failure. Al-Mansur had overextended his reach, his ambition stretching too far. The wealth he sought slipped through his fingers, while his kingdom, taxed to its breaking point, teetered on the edge of rebellion. His soldiers, trapped in a hostile land, fought not for glory or gold, but for survival. When Judah Pasha returned to Morocco in 1599, 9 years after he had first set out, he was hailed as a victor. 30 camels laden with gold were his reward. But the price of that victory was the complete destruction of the Songhai Empire. In a matter of months, the greatest empire in West Africa had collapsed. Torn apart by a single, devastating battle and a ruthless invasion, Songhai's fall was as swift as it was tragic. With the empire shattered, West Africa itself fractured. Where once a unified kingdom had ruled over vast stretches of land, countless smaller kingdoms now rose, each struggling for dominance. The powerful central authority that had held the region together was gone, and in its place was chaos. There was no force left strong enough to resist the encroaching European powers, who quickly seized their opportunity. They established trading posts along the coast, their hunger for wealth and human labor fueling the horrific rise of the transatlantic slave trade. West Africa's internal conflicts, ignited by the vacuum of power left by Songhai's fall, fed this brutal machine. The glory of Songhai, the grandeur of its cities, the brilliance of its scholars, the wealth of its trade routes, was lost forever. Gao, once the heart of an empire, slowly disappeared from memory. Its grand mosque, once a beacon of faith and learning, began to crumble under the relentless heat of the desert sun. Sycamores and silk cotton trees took root among the ruins, and the wind-blown sands of the Sahara quietly claimed the remnants of a once glorious capital. Timbuktu, the legendary city of scholars and libraries, suffered a similar fate. The destruction was so profound that the city's great works of knowledge, manuscripts filled with the wisdom of generations, had to be hidden away by families who risked everything to preserve them from looters and invading armies. Once a thriving hub of intellectual life, Timbuktu became a shadow of itself, its once bustling streets now silent, its rich history buried beneath the weight of war and devastation. The fall of the Songhai Empire was not just the collapse of a kingdom, it marked the end of an era. It was the final unraveling of centuries of West African civilization that had once risen to such heights of power and prosperity. In its place, chaos, fragmentation, and foreign exploitation reigned. The dreams of a unified West African empire, of a prosperous, powerful state that could stand as an equal on the world stage, were buried alongside the ruins of Gao and Timbuktu. Songhai, once the pride of Africa, was gone, lost to time, ambition, and the brutal realities of war. And with it, the golden age of West Africa came to an end, as the cycle of rise and fall continued its relentless march through history.